to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right. Welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. It's where you come, where you find what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? And I don't want you guys to forget, if you get anything out of the show, don't forget to follow, subscribe, comment. I've got a fascinating guy, Drew Chapin here. And, I was thinking when I was preparing for this, what kid doesn't want to grow up and be a tech entrepreneur or CEO in San Francisco? That's kind of one of those things is for, especially now. Everything's so software oriented and the next big thing coming out. Well, that's what Drew did. And he really had a cool idea too, because we were just talking about this before we got on. The whole idea of having these digital ads, and his company, he was the CEO of Binja Commerce Network, and it was the ability to be able to just click on the ad and buy on the ad and cut out that whole thing where you shifted over to another site and had to figure it out from there. And I think the fascinating thing about Drew's story is one, I always like these kind of stories because you sit and think, wow, what would I have done in that situation? Because one of the things that Drew was, is he was like, he was consumed with, getting the funding, getting the employees paid, doing the things that all he needed was just a little bit more time to make that happen. It just consumed him. And, one of the things I was reading in his article was, fake it until you make it. Just get it there because it's going to make it. It's a good idea. But if you fudge it a little bit when you're going out on your road show, or the numbers, they say you need 5 million in revenue. Well, let's just give them 5 million in revenue so we can get the money and we can grow it. We can be what we want to be. And I think one of the things, you never know, sometimes some of these judges, when they're sentencing you, they can be just hardcore. And I thought it was interesting what this judge said to Drew. It says, it appears you just didn't know how to fail. And, sometimes that's where we do come to a fork in the road is we're so built on bringing the good news. The people, want to hear the victories and what you've overcome. And sometimes it's not there. And then how do you handle that? So I can't wait to unpack all this with Drew. But before we do that, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car. Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. This is kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle of getting a car. Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they will go find that car for you. They'll deliver that car to you. They'll also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Welcome in, Drew Chapin. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Brent. How are you?
I'm good. We're doing this right before the big festivities of Christmas. I think Christmas starts it's on Monday, right?
Yeah, it is. Yep.
Yeah, and we're doing this. This will come out like they're gonna be thinking it was gonna be out in January. These guys are talking about Christmas, but man, isn't it better to be out than in for holidays?
Absolutely. Yeah. I left Lewisburg where I served in April. And so, those last couple of months, which drag for anybody, but especially going through the holidays, going through Thanksgiving and Christmas and everything right on my way out the door. It was a real slog this time last year. But so grateful to be with friends and family this time of year this year.
Yeah, and I think that To me, that might have been one of the worst parts of prison was that it was when you really felt totally disconnected. I mean, you really felt it that you were not part of the world with your family, your friends, and everything that was going on the outside. And you would see it going on because you'd see the advertising and the commercials on TV. And then there you are, you're in prison.
Yeah,
It's
of
just
course.
such a weird, bad
And
feeling.
for me, the weather. I mean, I had spent the decade before being in Lewisburg in California, and then all of a sudden, I remember it was Christmas Day last year, sitting there in this like tin box, and it's like 20 below zero and all that kind of stuff in central Pennsylvania. It was just absolutely, bitter, bitter cold, and that added to all of it.
The bitter cold. The other thing was I wanted to give a shout out to Jeff Grant because Drew and I are both part of and met on this incredible grouping that Jeff does is a white collar support group, and it's a national. I didn't know it even existed until I ran across Jeff Grant, and he's an incredible person and is doing such great things. And so I did want to give a shout out to Jeff and his organization because he's one of the good guys doing the good stuff. So Drew, um, so I know what happened when it happened, but can you take us back a little bit of what Drew was like as a kid? Because what you did, you started doing really early on. Was it always in this, little Drew's mind that I'm going to grow up and be this tech CEO?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I grew up in New England boy, just outside of New York City, and both of my parents are entrepreneurs in one
Yeah,
way or
that
another.
always, that there's always something to that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my dad has a small business. My mom is an artist who's run galleries and things like that. So it's my whole upbringing. You see entrepreneurship up close and personally, and then also growing up in the '90s and just being technologically inclined and interested in everything. I mean, you're growing up watching Bill Gates and Steve Jobs do all these cool things, and you're reading the stories. And I remember being like 10 years old and I'm reading like PC World magazine, and I'm it's really really cool. So it was very clear that that was going to ultimately be the path. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, for a kid who's got that kind of brain that can figure that kind of stuff out, that has that technology bent to it, there were some just incredible stories. I remember uh, when I lived down in Austin, Texas, right out of college, and Michael Dell, he was creating computers in his college dorm room, and then he becomes Dell. And these stories in the tech world, that's where those fancy stories of coming from nothing in the garage, Bill Gates and Jobs and everybody that they become these kingmakers in the tech
Oh,
world.
absolutely. It's like a romantic vision of entrepreneurship. Everyone
Yeah,
wants to talk about the garages and things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So when you're reading these PC magazines, do you sounds like it's a pretty normal childhood. You got mom and dads, mom's an artist, dad's an entrepreneur, kids. What's school like for you?
Yeah, yeah. I was a pretty like average student. Was involved in sports, played a lot of baseball growing up, would run and ski and do all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think everybody, well, I think a lot of people think that their upbringing was normal, but like this was as normal, middle of the road suburbia, kind of upbringing that you can have.
So you advance out. Where do you go to school, college?
Yeah, went up to Vermont primarily because I
Pretty
wanted to
area.
get some skiing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and and quickly like got involved. I think another thing that's kind of core to just who I am as a person when I kind of coming up. I've always been involved in my community. Like I was an Eagle Scout, growing up, and I went to college and I was like president of the student body and like all that kind of thing. Just like this like hyper involved person, and graduated with a business degree and very quickly got right to it. I mean, I started working in tech actually before I graduated. I started working for Microsoft in kind of a rotational development program, and
Was it like an internship, Drew? Is that what it
just
was?
sort of,
Yeah.
yeah. The intention was to give you exposure to a couple of different teams in different areas, and kind of put you on that track to continue on. I did not. I kind of caught wind of a couple of my coworkers who were leaving to go join a startup, and I hopped right to it, and that started my whole the next phase of my career where working for progressively smaller and smaller companies, seeing
Yeah.
a bunch of some nice wins, some
Yeah.
colossal failures, but just enjoying every minute of it.
So when you jump to a startup, like what age would you have been? Like when you jump into that world, that's got to be exciting.
Yeah, I was like 24. Yeah, mid 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely. Just like one of those my biggest issue working for a big tech company, and I think in general, in retrospect, not a surprise. I didn't like being that tiny cog in a big machine, and at the end of the day, not knowing if you made any kind of impact or did a good job or a bad job. I was really seeking kind of that. Um, uh, yeah, the opportunity to have a bigger impact, and at the very least know that what I'm doing is making some kind of difference in what we're doing. So
well, and being in a big company, you don't have that entrepreneurial feel that is, if you're wired that way, if it's in your DNA and you've grown up that way, I can see why you would have thought, "Hey, I'm going to jump out with these guys on these startups." So then you get into these startups, but then somewhere along the way, I don't know what age you are, but I guess it's in your later 20s. Uh, you and another guy uh, take it upon yourselves to say, "Hey, why don't we go do this on our own?"
yeah, a company that I had been working at was going through kind of a pivot, reorganization, recap kind of thing, and it was one of those things where myself and a talented senior developer who I had worked with a bunch at the company and enjoyed working with, said, "Hey, like why don't we go kind of strike out on our own and see if we can do this on our own?" And I had this concept at the time, this is, geez, about 10 years ago now, to change the way that e-commerce is delivered, because I had kind of looked at it and said, that Amazon homepage has not really changed, in 20 years.
Yeah,
And now it still looks largely the same.
yeah,
And there's all these different things, like even if you want to buy toothpaste today, and you've bought toothpaste from Amazon before, you go to Amazon to buy your toothpaste, it's still like on the low end, it's like a 12-step process.
yeah.
We were just looking at different user experiences and ways that we could streamline that and eliminate friction and just do it differently.
Okay, so Drew, did you have like jumping out like that? Because an entrepreneurs, usually have an idea and they jump and they don't have a lot of money. Had you put back any money, or were you saying, "Hey, I'm flying with this because I kind of know what I'm doing. I've been around a couple of these startups and I'll figure it out as we jump off the cliff."
There was a little bit of bootstrapping in there, but I had sought out and found investors very early on, people who were comfortable in the napkin stage, and a couple of like incubator and accelerator programs, which are programs where very early stage companies get brought in, and it's sort of like a startup college. Like they'll give you some amount of investment, and they'll give you like office space and some coaching and access to accountants and lawyers and things like that. And you go through these like classes, these cohorts, and so went through a few of those, and we went through and did um, what is really like a very typical early stage startup launch cycle. It was bringing a little bit of a little bit of external money, like incubators, accelerators. You get a little media, you push out a mobile app, you get a couple hundred users, and we did that and jumped through all the hoops and had some good initial success.
So what are you thinking? Like, is this at this point in that world, is it we're going to scale this thing and take over the world, or were
Oh,
you thinking,
I'm thinking we just reinvented e-commerce. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm in my mid late 20s, and getting all this positive feedback and all these signals of like, hey, keep going. You're doing well. So yeah, I thought we were crushing it.
so when I'm reading these articles, it sounds like to me that you guys get in this, but you actually pivot. in your company to a whole, it sounded like there was a piece that you guys thought, could we do this? And then that became the whole idea. Is that what happened?
Yeah, basically, not to get too deep in the weeds on it, but we had a mobile app. The mobile app was good, but it's very, very difficult back then, today, whatever. It's very difficult to get that real estate on someone's phone, to get them to actually take that
To
step to
take the
download a
app,
mobile app,
download it.
right?
Yeah.
Let alone actually use it or remember to look at it or whatever, right? The mobile app business is very difficult. And we were really trying to get creative about how to acquire users for the mobile app. And what I kept going back to is like, geez, when I go to these events and I go around with my phone and I hand it to someone, I say, hey, this is what we're doing. And they play with it for 5 seconds. They go, oh, okay, interesting. I'll check that on my own. And so just giving people the experience was the key to getting someone to actually go and do it. So what we built initially, again, just to acquire those users, was a little ad that would replicate the mobile app experience, where you get one product at a time, and it says what you can do, and you can check out, and it's very quick. Or you could hit next product and swipe left, swipe right, do all that kind of stuff. We recreated the mobile app inside of an online display ad unit that could be shown anywhere on the internet, right? Any website, any your favorite publication, whatever. And when we did that, we very quickly realized, like, wait a minute, there are really clean unit economics here. We're basically buying and selling impressions, right? Or
Hmm.
the each eyeball. And that seemed like what would be much easier to become like the scalable opportunity, right? The customer acquisition cost was easy and the revenue, was clear. And seemed like that would be a much bigger business.
So you guys jump into that, and it sounds like, because the way, because you were thinking, well, we need to give them the experience before they experience it, and then that evolves into more or less creating a digital ad that you can create what you want, the action right there in the ad, and it doesn't take you somewhere else. And it's in that time period, it sounds like that was kind of, you guys were building the boat for this new way, and your task was is to, because there was a little bit of a lead time of when you get paid, to when somebody, buys into this and then they pay you out, you had a little bit of a cash deal that, hey, we got to go out and grab and get money raised. And that became a lot of what you were doing, right?
Yeah, it's the ebbs and flows and kind of the day to day grind of it. Um, it's just kind of it was just a cash nightmare. I had an investor back then who we sat down and I would talk through our issue, like our cash crunch issue, and he would just say, "Well, this thing's a cash incinerator because you have to pay for the placements, right? I don't really want to say a name of a publication, but whatever, any publication that you can think of, we pay for those impressions." And then we don't get paid for just delivering that ad for 90, 120, 150 days. And
Which
when
is
you're
a
going through
while.
a period of growth, yeah, it's months. When you're going through a period of growth like that, you're laying out every dollar you can to continue growing, and then you're not seeing it come back for a couple of months. It's very difficult. And so we found ourselves in a position where we needed to fundraise quite a bit more. I think at the time we'd only raised a couple $100,000, and we said, "Geez, look, we have this formula: money in, money out, right?" And um, the ad business, it's not like today AI or, in, the last couple of years, there's been a lot of buzz around crypto or virtual reality or all these different things.
Yeah.
The ad business is not one of these sexy businesses that attracts, big, big, big investment rounds. It's just a very kind of black
It's
and white business.
functional.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and so we would go out and uh, hear constantly, well, we like the business, but we want to see you get to this number. Or, we like the business, but, we want to see you explore like X, Y, and Z. And for some time, it's just, running the business 40 hours a week or more, 60 hours a week, whatever. And then running a full-time fundraise where you're just constantly experiencing that rejection. I have a thick skin, and the core of my career is really around sales. So I'm used to rejection. I have
Sure.
I'm okay with rejection, but it just became too much. And you get burnt out and you get pushed to the absolute limit. And so they'd say, "Hey, I want to see X." And so what I started doing was showing them X, right? And what began as like one small fib or, like one little exaggeration or saying we were partnered with someone still, I just wouldn't take their name off the deck, even though they canceled
Yeah.
their contract last month or whatever, all these
Hmm.
little lies. But one lie leads to five lies, leads to dozens of lies, leads to hundreds and thousands of lies to the point where, you know, after the FBI wakes me up, which we can talk about, and I'm
Yeah.
sitting there, and a couple weeks later, I'm reading the discovery and everything, and I look at the totality of the things that I did, and I
Yeah.
go, wow, yeah. You read this and you go, holy cow, right?
Yeah.
But I was just being reactive, and it really just kind of
In the
snowballed.
moment. But I want to explore that a little bit because, you know, a lot of times there's a lot of, like you said, there's the romance story to being an entrepreneur, and the heroic, the entrepreneur is the guy that jumps off the cliff and he builds his wings on the way down. And guys are attracted to that because it's the macho way to build. And there's also stories out there, you've got Uber and others that, they flaunted, basically bumping up against the laws in the States all the way along. And I just, the movie, what's it called? Pumped.
Oh yeah,
It's,
sure.
it's crazy. I think it's on Netflix, but it's crazy because all the way through politically, everything was this, you're going to get shut down. You're going to get shut down. And you can look at some of these sites out there, like when Twitter was growing, they fudged on their numbers to show that they had more than what they had, but it continued to
Of
grow
course.
and everything was okay as long as everybody's winning. And I think that's the thing that happens in the business world is a lot of times when you get a fork in the road and you think, well, damn it, seems like everybody else is doing it. I've got to get
Mm.
here because my story, my business, my plan's better. And I think that's where you get into this world of, what do I do? I've put this much time into it. I think if I could just have a little bit more time, it'll make it. And then I'll be that story on Pumped where, I
Right.
became a $1 billion juggernaut. I just stayed with it. And I can see how that happens because you get into the rhythm and the flow and the intoxication of that feel.
Yeah, and there's a lot like you were saying, in the pumped story. But you're in business school and you're studying how so many of these companies made it, and even there's some things in early Nike, and there's a story about Fred Smith at FedEx where he gambled and went and played blackjack with the
Yeah,
company's
like
last five
blackjack on
thousand dollars,
$5,000.
right?
That's
Right.
exactly
Um, and we tell these stories in business school and laugh, and just be like, oh,
yeah,
and whatever. And the culture around it is just not it's not good.
right,
And
right.
so when you find yourself in that position, it's exactly right. It's I've invested 3 years of my life in this. I have employees. We're trying to keep the lights on. We're trying to keep people employed. And this is the kind of self-talk that you give yourself that justifies, like, yeah, I know what I'm doing is, gray area, or then later, I know that what I'm doing is wrong. I knew that
Hmm.
what I was doing was wrong, but you justify it because you go, well, net, like we're keeping this thing going. I have investors that I have to, take care of. I have all this different kind of stuff. I need to keep going. And you think that you trick yourself into thinking like, well, this is the tough thing that entrepreneurs have to do.
Yeah,
This is
this is
what
the tough
makes
part
entrepreneurs
before
great.
I make it
Right.
to the top. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I get it. Well, tell me, Drew, like there's always that moment when you feel like you're kind of close to the edge. When did it start feeling like for you that, holy shit, this could really be a big deal, that I'm in trouble?
Um, at no point did I feel that until the FBI showed up.
So it
And
was just that. I mean, they knock on the door and you're like, holy shit.
that's when I knew that it was a problem. I knew that our books were sideways, and I knew that this was something that I needed to fix. And it's something that we had started working on. But my feeling was at the time, look, it's in everybody's interest. It's in the investor's interest. It's in the bank's interest. It's in everybody's interest for us to work together on straightening this thing out and seeing it through.
Yeah.
And that's what I was telling myself. And so as, things were sideways and we're trying to work it out, I went, well, like why would anybody flip the table over? It doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
But sure enough, that's what happened. And so in November, it's Thanksgiving week in 2020. So you can just bring yourself back to 2020 and think about COVID and the
Yeah.
lockdowns and all the difficult
Yeah.
year that everybody was having. The end of November, holiday week, I'm getting ready to go back home to visit my folks. And it's Monday at 6 a.m. I'm dead asleep, and big knock at the door. And sure enough, I go downstairs and there's, a dozen FBI agents with assault rifles and all that kind of stuff. And they had scaled the back of my house to make sure I didn't run out the back door and block the driveway and made the big scene. And that's when I knew,
What's
okay,
going through
this
your
is a
mind?
problem.
I can't imagine because I've interviewed people that have had that happen, but that adrenaline rush of that moment, what's going through your mind?
I couldn't even tell you. I
Blur.
just, yeah, I knew why they were there. And it was just kind of like, okay, like, what's the next thing? Like, what's now what? You know? And it wasn't very clear, like they talked to you a little bit, throw you in cuffs, threw my then fiance, in handcuffs and the whole thing as they start going through the house and doing all that kind of stuff. They send me to county. And I've never. This is part of why you mentioned Jeff Grant's group
Hmm.
earlier in earlier. I had no idea what the process is like. They say, charge this, that, the other. I have no clue if I'm going to county and that's just where I'm going to be for months or
Forever.
years or
Yeah.
whatever. I have no clue. So, yeah, that's what happened. I was thrown in a car and brought to county.
Which county jail's a lot worse than anything that anybody else is going to go through, even when they get to prison. That's the bottom rung that you got thrown into. What happens next in that situation?
Um, it was it was just very kind of, procedural. I mean, I was brought in there and I was just kind of sitting there for a few hours waiting to hear like what was going on at all, like if they could get in front of a judge that day or the next day or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, very fortunate that I had a lawyer to call, so
Yeah.
when I got there, I call home and I'm talking to my dad, and I'm going like, okay, here's the name, Google, like call, like, let's get this thing moving. And I'm there, and I remember, uh,
What was your dad? I mean, had to have been
bless him,
totally,
man. I
yeah,
mean, incredibly supportive, friends and family, but especially my parents. I mean, he
yeah.
was very action oriented and just kind of like, it was kind of like,
Here's what we
okay,
got to do.
this is insane, and I can't believe that we're going through this, but like that's for another day. Like let's
Hmm.
focus on getting
Let's
you,
deal with what we've got right
out of
here.
county. Yeah.
Yeah.
So his mindset, yeah, unbelievably grateful for that mindset. And that was it. I mean, like I remember, I was brought in on a Monday. Initially thought that I would appear in front of a judge, and then maybe, they were saying, oh, you'll spend a couple hours. I had to spend the night, which is not the end of the world, but was pretty freaking rough. And on Tuesday, I remember them saying like, "Oh yeah, like, you'll get in front of a judge today." And I remember asking the guard, I'm going like, "Hey, I'm supposed to have court today. Do you know when I'm doing that?" And he's going, "No, you're not on the list." And then I'm thinking, "Well, it's Thanksgiving on Thursday. I might not. I might be here
Yeah.
for a week." I'm sitting in there. It's just this whole, it's very disorienting and difficult. But yeah, ended up going home and um, basically my whole 2021 was about 13 months from when I was arrested until I was sentenced, and was kind of a lost year. It was kind of a just floating around waiting to see what was going to happen next.
That's such a weird time period too, when you've been indicted and you're in limbo, and it's weird because you're carrying on in the world, but you've got this huge weight of no one can even identify what this weight is. It's so different than what anybody's dealing with.
Absolutely, yeah, and say nothing of the fact that, like I was running a startup and working 60 hours a week plus, and used to just going like 100 miles an hour, and all of a sudden it all came to a screeching halt, and you've got nothing to do when you wake up. You're just waiting for like that next call or email from your lawyer. I ended up volunteering a lot and working on some side projects and things like that. But just, you're just kind of out there floating and dealing with all that uncertainty.
Well, and the company at the time, did it just flatten out when all that happened?
Yeah, it is going through a bankruptcy process. Yeah, and
Yeah.
liquidating assets and doing all that kind of
So it
stuff.
was
Stuff
just,
that
that was
is
part of what,
is still happening now, 3 years later. So,
well, I'm not surprised about that. That takes forever. And
oh,
if
it
I
was funny.
remember, go ahead.
It was just on that note, just quickly. I remember when I was talking to my lawyer about taking a plea deal. She was showing me like the point totals, and you get different points for different amounts of damage and things like that. And I said, well, they're putting the company through a liquidation bankruptcy. There's going to be some amount of money that's recovered. Shouldn't we wait until they're done so we know what the total damage number is, right? Because
Yeah.
it will presumably shrink, right? And it has, and that's good. But the lawyer said, well, we can do that if you'd like. But I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. And you might be waiting a lot longer than you think.
Mm.
And I thought at the time, I was thinking, oh, it might be a difference of a couple of months, but here we are 3 years later, they're still
Three
not done.
years
I
later,
would still be waiting for that,
and your
yeah,
life would
that
be on
number.
hold for all that time.
Completely, right.
Yeah. So Drew, what was it like when you decided, okay, here's your deal, and you look at it, say, oh, holy wow, this is what I'm looking at. I'm going to take the plea. What, how do you process through all that?
I knew the day that I got arrested that I did not want to go to trial and that I would want to figure out a plea one way or another. Because
Hmm.
although, of course, they didn't get every detail correct, and there's a lot of like little things. I knew
Well,
that I had
they
done
never do,
wrong.
Drew. I was talking to somebody the other day. The funny thing about it is that when I was in business, we had a lot of good press too. And when we
Hmm.
had the good press, they also got things wrong. But when it's good, you're like, ah, well, that's just kind of their
Sure.
narrative. That's what they're going with. And then when it goes bad, they just have their own narrative too. And
Yeah.
it really actually is on both sides. Whether press
Yeah.
is good or press is bad, they have their own narrative, how they want to write that story and how it's going to go.
Totally, yeah. But I just thought, well, geez, every detail might not be correct here, but I know that I did wrong,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, like let's just make this easier on everybody, make it easier, save everybody a bunch of time, and let's
Yeah.
just like cut to the chase, right? Like, and so, I mean, like so many people do after they get arrested, you cling to the hope that maybe you won't have to go away.
Yeah.
Um, but I am so grateful. My lawyer was very just direct and honest about the reality of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Often, you pay somebody like a lawyer, and for better or worse, they tell you what you want to hear. Like
Right.
they're trying to like be there, be your advocate, be your buddy, be like, oh yeah, like why would they put you in, whatever.
Right.
I did not have that experience, and at the time, it was difficult to hear, and you kind of you go through that. But from very early in the process, my lawyer was going like, yeah, like wire fraud, like that's time. You have to do time. It's about minimizing the damage and moving through this as quickly as we can. So
So you're standing there, the judge tells you you've got, I think it was a 3-year sentence. Then I'm thinking you weren't immediately remanded. You
no.
went home. Yeah. And I think that's a weird time period because you wait to see something in the mail that tells you, oh, okay, I'm going here.
Mm.
So what were you doing in that time when you're waiting for your
Well, a lot of it was
decision day?
because my sentencing had been moved a few times just for like administrative reasons or whatever. And so, I was originally supposed to be sentenced in October, and then I got moved to November and then December. And so I was still living in San Francisco. And up until like 2 days before sentencing, I wasn't sure that we were actually going to have a sentencing. So I'm just going living my life kind of month to month.
Yeah.
And so after sentencing actually happens and it's clear like what's going to happen, there's a lot of just like life stuff. Like I had to pack up, my whole apartment and,
Yeah.
put
Your
stuff in
world.
storage and do all that. It was like a lot of that.
Mhm.
And then it was coming back east and then sitting and waiting. And a bizarre part of this was I was supposed to report like February 1st, and we were getting a couple days out, and I still hadn't been assigned. I still hadn't received that letter, like you say. And I talked to my lawyer and I was going, hey, like, what's going on with this? And she was going, well, you're not going to go into transit. I know that on the show previously, like, people have talked about transit stories and things like
which is
that.
horrible. Yeah, nightmare.
I had no idea until she said, well, you're not going into transit. And
Just
so
huge.
we kept on getting these 7-day extensions to report while we were waiting for the BOP. And I think we went through like 3 of them before
Wow.
they finally sent the thing, and said, yeah, you're going to Pennsylvania. So not only was that time period weird and, you're moving and whatever, but I kept on getting like, okay, I think in 3 days I'm going to be in federal prison, and then it would move, and it was just kind of like,
That would be
you're
so
just living
weird
day to day. It's so weird.
because oddly enough, when I got my letter that said I was going to Leavenworth, and it was like one of those things like, oh, I've heard of that one. That doesn't sound good.
Hmm.
But the it also was for me, I wanted to get on with it. I wanted to get with it and get in so
Absolutely.
I could get going. And you just got you get up to 2 or 3 days and get pushed out further. I can't imagine the mental part of that because for me, up until I got that letter, once I got the letter, I said, okay, on January 14th, 2014, I'm going to be, there at 1 o'clock and I'm going to be standing at the gates of Leavenworth, but at least I can start, get,
Yeah.
get this process started.
I mean, since we settled on the terms of the plea agreement in March 2021, and I was ready that day. I went, okay, like, here we go. Like, let's do this. Like, next week, let's go. And so, yeah, you're just sitting around, you're waiting for like process and paperwork and administrative stuff. And the whole time you're just going like, I'm ready to go
Ready.
because, no one talks about this. But that time beforehand, you're on supervision,
Yeah.
right? And it's a little like prison light
Yep.
already, and you're just not getting
Yep.
credit for that time. It's just, whatever. Um, so you're sitting there and I'm just going, I would really like this to speed up.
Yeah. Well, and when you go, Drew, and they start processing you through, is it still like the COVID protocols type stuff that's going on?
Yeah, that's actually was a really rough introduction to prison life because it was February 2021. I believe at the time Lewisburg was in like yellow alert, for COVID. I showed up. I had um, a book with me. I had a photo of my family and my vaccination card. And I walked in and told them I was here to surrender. And they said, okay. When they test you for COVID, and even though I had tested negative and I had my vaccination card, they said, okay, well, we're still going to need you to quarantine for a couple days, right? And so the camp at Lewisburg is adjacent to a medium security facility.
Most of them
And they
are. Yeah.
said, right. They said, well, we're going to put you up behind the wall while you sit there in quarantine, 24-hour quarantine in the 5x7 cell or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like what you see in the movies, like exactly like to a T. And so I go up there and I go, all right, well, good thing I brought this book, right? And
Yeah.
I sit there
And they
and,
let you keep the book
like,
too, which is nice.
yeah, which is very, very nice. Yes. You lose sense of time and everything. I mean, like the window, you can barely tell if it's light or dark outside. There's no clocks. There's nothing like that. And you sit in there and very quickly it becomes disorienting. And,
Mm-hmm.
I remember just thinking like, okay, like, counting sleeps, and I'm just going 3, 2, 1, and then I'm down at the camp, right?
Yeah.
I go 3, 2, 1, and I'm still there, right? And then I go, well, all right, maybe it'll be 5 days, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what the CDC recommends, 3 to 5 days. Maybe it's 5 days. So I do that.
Uh-huh.
5 days comes and goes. 7 days comes and goes. 10 days comes and goes. 2 weeks comes and
Oh
goes.
my God.
And then on the 22nd day, so 21 full days in that, they come down and they say, hey, get your stuff, as if I had any stuff. And said, be ready to move in 5 minutes. And I remember when they opened up that door, 24-hour lockdown, again, just so disoriented, no
Mm-hmm.
idea what time of day it is or anything like that. My whole body, I had this release, this like reaction where I'm just shaking, head to toe,
Mm-hmm.
just like total nervous system like reaction. And and I walked down to the camp. But so yeah, I had a nice little COVID introduction to my BOP experience.
Man, I'll tell you that I've talked to some people that had to go in during COVID. And there was one guy, uh, and he didn't have a very long sentence, and he was in lockdown solitary for 6 months.
Mm,
And his attorney was trying to get him out, and the whole thing. But what happens is, I mean, they just and they've got these protocols, and they just you can just get lost in the system. That's what's scary about, you went in at a time period in prison when uh, they could take a lot of what you would think, that you would think as a prisoner privileges, like visiting and walking outside and all those things. And that it's always bad to be in prison, but when you have the ability to take away anything that people have, it takes a whole nother. So let me know. So you get out, you've been in there for 22 days. You get down to the camp. What's your world like? How are you walking into that?
well, it's not like they give you um, any kind of like real guidebook or idea. They just
No,
kind of dump you in there, and so
everybody's looking at you. There's the new guy.
totally right. I was very fortunate. I had a great first bunkie who just kind of like looked at my face when I walked down there and just saw, like, oh, okay, this guy was just behind the wall for 21 days and he has no idea what he's,
Yeah.
what's heads and tail. And he really helped me out and just kind of like showed me the ropes. It was like, hey, like chow hall's up there, here's where this is. Let me help you go get your laundry bag, like all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So very fortunate that both my initial bunkie and just some other people, like you start meeting people and everyone is so kind and supportive. Something that I certainly like stuck with me. And once I had kind of my feet underneath me and I got a couple months in, like I was made sure to do the same for people that were coming in. But um, yeah, I mean, like you're just kind of thrown right into the tank, and thankfully, people who are going through that shared experience are there to help out.
Yeah, and that's a surprise because you don't see that they don't show any of that on TV. Um, all you see about prison on TV is these people in here are animals, and some of it, like that locked up stuff is, they let them into some of those state prisons and stuff, and they it's almost like these people perform for the cameras. But it is probably my biggest surprise is how many people did help and wanted to help, and um, it's such a relief that that
Yeah,
happens
yeah.
because. But it's also like for me when I got there, I remember the first night I was there, I was on the top bunk and I was looking out, and you could, like you were saying, I could see the big medium of Leavenworth. I was like, God, after all this time, after everything that I've been through, I'm here at the top bunk in Leavenworth prison, and I've got a 5-year sentence that I'm going to have to figure out. I mean, did you have a moment where you were like, holy shit, I'm here, what am I going to do? How, because for me, for me, I thought, well, what do I do when I'm in really deep shit? I literally got out a piece of paper that my bunkie had given me, and I started writing down goals of what I
Mhm.
wanted to accomplish while I was in there, so that I could start feeling like myself, of like what I used to do on the outside when I was, here are my tasks, here's what I'm going to do. So it got me focused kind of in a different way. Did you have a feel for that when you got in that world?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, my career, my whole life to that point had just been goal oriented, seeing like, okay, here's the thing that I want to do. Let's make sure that we get there. And I had a very similar experience. I mean, early on, you say like, all right, here are my like physical fitness goals, and here are, the books that I want to read, and here are,
Yeah.
the things that I want to do, on a spiritual level, like we're
Hmm.
really like want to make sure that I, fully experience this and understand it and process it and all that. Yeah, of course. I mean, you set some goals and then you try and figure out how to how to
Eat your
attack them.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest thing about prison, I think, is that there's so much time. And if you can find a way to eat up your time, whether it's working out, whether it's reading, whether it's getting into a prison job that, you eat up your time with, but it's about that. Or it's, a lot of people get in there and, like Josh Boyer, I interviewed a few weeks ago, he became a guy that knew everything about the law because he spent all of his time in the law library and started writing motions for people. So there's all kinds of different ways that people do time. But um, how
Hmm.
did you? Because there's hard days in prison. You know, you get in there. Did you have any way that you used to get out of a bad day?
Yeah. Well, one, everyone says, when you get there, get to it, find your routine and stick to it, and that helps the days move. And so, like exactly what you're talking about, the work, working out, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. Doesn't save you from hard days, but that really helps you just kind of like moving forward. There are some people who like sleep their bids away, or they spend it all in front of the
Yeah.
TV or whatever, and like I couldn't fathom that. Um, One thing that really helped. Um, it's funny. I'm not a particularly religious person. Um, when I sat down with Jeff Grant, who runs the support group that
Hmm.
we keep referencing, um, a couple of weeks before I reported, and he asked me. He said, like, "Well, are you spiritual? Are you religious?" And I said, "No, no, not really." And he kind of paused and went like, "Well, you might want to think about it."
That
And
sounds like
so,
Jeff.
and yeah,
Jeff
yeah.
just throws that stuff out there and lobs it in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I went down this journey, and I started, it came up in a couple of books and talking to some people, and I got really into meditating,
Mm,
and it became like a religious practice, like in something that I would do, throughout the day,
mm.
multiple times a week and all that kind of stuff. In fact, to the extent that by the time I left, I was running the Buddhist meditation on Sundays in the
I like
chapel,
that.
like going in there not knowing the first thing, and then it becoming so core to my daily life, that I was
Yeah.
actually like, yeah, teaching people how to meditate and stuff. But yeah,
Well,
or
that's
helping
good because
people.
no, that makes sense because finding something like that is a game changer. I think with because you don't have a lot of control over anything in prison. So if you can trick your and do a mind hack that you feel like you have control, um, it makes it better.
Yeah, or
Strangely,
even just like a mantra that I had, throughout my time there, and I've continued, is just radical acceptance. So
yes,
like these crazy things happen. Like I saw people, engaging in self harm, or would see, fights, or like when I went through the RDAP program, we would experience like the whole program would be shut down, right? Because one
yeah.
person was misbehaving and everybody has to, whatever.
Everybody gets. I went through that program too.
Yeah.
It's so
And,
irritating.
and we actually got shut down to such an extent that they moved everybody's date back 30 days, and like all these, and then all of a sudden people are missing like their kids' birthdays and all this stuff because they're spending
Yeah,
more time because these people, and it's just radical acceptance, and just being like, okay, you know, that's the fact in the matter, accept it, move
accept
forward,
it.
right?
Be a little bit more patient with the things that you have control over and the things you don't. Yeah, all that
Right.
makes all kinds of sense. So when you started getting closer to the door of your freedom, what? Because I think that's kind of you get to a point. I think where you get into that what we just talked about. That's your world. And then you start thinking, well, I've only got like 3 or 4 months left, and you start thinking about the outside world and what was going through your mind as you got closer to that part of your
I had
time.
a great little moment about halfway through my bid, where I was walking the track, with two people who became friends. One of them was leaving the next day, and the other one was leaving the next week. And they were talking, because they're counting down hours at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like trailing behind a little bit and just kind of listening. And one of them said to the other, goes, "So do you think you made a good use of your time?"
Mhm.
And such a simple question, but it stopped me cold in my tracks. And even though I showed up and I had all these good intentions and these goals that I was working towards and all that kind of stuff, really caused me to take inventory with about 5 or 6 months to go.
Yeah.
Am I waking up every day and being like tenacious and making sure that I'm really checking those boxes and doing all that? And so that was that created sort of an anxiety, around just making sure that I like really can say that I used the 14 months that I was in Lewisburg
Hmm.
to their absolute, best. Make sure that I learn these lessons, make sure that I better myself, make sure that this isn't wasted. And so, it'd be like a week to go and it would be like, oh man, I've read 98 books. I really want to get to 100 books,
Yeah.
and it was just
Yeah.
things like that, it was just like anxiety and sort of like cranking up. But you also, you start thinking ahead and you start thinking about, careers and all of that. And just like, okay, like when I get out, like what are the next steps? What are the
Options.
goals? Like,
Yeah.
what does it look like?
And that
That's
can
another
cause a
black
little
box in
anxiety
this.
too.
Of course, yeah, because the next black box in this series of black boxes is the halfway house, and not having any idea what that's going to be like, and no one in Lewisburg, was telling us like, "Hey, here's what to expect at the halfway house" or anything, and so that was the next thing to figure out.
I thought the halfway house was a worse experience than the prison myself, but we we have a really bad halfway house here in St. Louis, which I don't know if there's a good halfway house. I
I
think
was
I've
gonna
heard,
say, tell me when you hear about a
yeah,
good halfway house. Yeah, no,
but and a lot of people don't really even get that. I think the excitement of getting out, you're getting your freedom and and you're also very excited, but you have this thing in the back of your mind is I'm going somewhere where again, I don't know what it is. And I don't think it's probably going to be good. And I've got to again adapt to that. And so you're kind of half and half. You're straddling the world and there's a lot of people looking at you. Gosh, we're so happy for you. We're so and you couldn't be any happier to get out, but you're also making a next step into the unknown again.
yeah, especially when you know that you're so close to being sent to home confinement. There's like a technical date where they're supposed to send you, and there's these different process points, like they have to inspect your home and all that. And you go, okay, well, like we checked these
Checked all
boxes.
the boxes. Yeah.
Can I go home now? And then it still takes like 3 weeks,
Oh
and you're
yeah.
going like, "All right, I don't know why that took so long," but so you're kind of, yeah, again, you're sort of acclimating to a new environment. I agree with you. My environment in the halfway house was not it was just not good at all. I mean, it wasn't. It was less comfortable than the prison
For
itself.
sure.
There were,
Yeah.
yeah,
What
the
what
people
was
were
your day
different, like
like
all
when you
that.
got out? What did you do when you got out that day? Who picked you up? Where'd you go? What happened?
Yeah, my my folks picked me up, and we had very very little time to actually get there.
Which
And
is
they said,
also anxiety ridden, because they
totally
talk
right,
about if you
because
don't get there, they'll take you back in. It's a
last thing
violation.
you want to do is violate, right?
Yeah.
But there's enough time. My parents go, "Oh, is there something that you want to like eat? Is there something like that?" And I go, "Yeah, I would love a big McDonald's meal, just pile it up, right?"
Love it.
Yeah. So we go to this McDonald's like in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, and I got to tell you, I have pictures. Just the worst McDonald's meal you've ever seen. Like the burger's flat and smushed and like all messed up and like
Not a good
missing
one.
things and whatever. And I went, wow, like this is perfect. This is just perfect.
Well, for those of us who go to McDonald's, there are good and bad McDonald's for
Of
sure.
course, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And then yeah, I just went straight to the halfway house, and it was one of those things. You show up at the halfway house, and you don't know if they're just going to say, "Hey, nice to meet you," you know, see you later, or if
Hmm.
they're going to say, "Yeah, like here's your room assignment, and you're going to be here for a month or whatever." You just have no clue. And so showed up, and I ended up spending about a month in the halfway house, which is ultimately fine, but
It's
certainly
frustrating
like you get
because you're
really
so
geared
close
up
to the
to.
other side.
Yeah, and you see it, and you get little
Hmm.
tastes of it, You can have food delivered on certain nights and things like that,
Yeah.
and you have a phone, right? So you know,
I kind of think
uh,
that's the biggest difference, Drew, is that when you get out into the halfway house, you're still in a lockdown. I mean, they're giving you passes. It seems like you don't even have as many privileges as you had in prison, and you're
hmm
so close. You're so close. You can they'll give you a pass to go home, and I think for me that was like the most frustrating time of my whole time was being right at the edge. I had a job. I had a place to go. My wife is on the other side of this thing. And then, I'd get there and we'd have dinner and then I had to get back uh,
yeah,
by a certain time. It was just so frustrating.
yeah,
And the whole reentry thing, for some reason, there's a lot of different reasons, but Reentry isn't easy. It's just not
No,
easy.
no, no. It's uh, it's hard. Objectively, I understand how they arrived at the system they have right now. I can look at that and say, okay, there are a lot of people who don't have a place to go. There are a lot
Yeah,
of people who really do. They need the career services to help them get that, the job in the warehouse or the whatever that
right.
first step job is going to be. They need to, set the same, all that kind of stuff. I understand. Um, but then there are a lot of people like yourself and like myself, where it's like, okay, this is actually impeding progress. It's making it so that I can't work. It's making it so that I'm not, all that kind of stuff. And it's just not as black and white as the system, is built for.
No, never is, especially when you're dealing with the government. There's always
Yeah.
there's certain good intentions that come from an idea and then they implement it. And that's where all the craziness starts. So Drew, your world now, what's going on in your world now? How long have you been out?
I left in April. I spent the summer when I was still on BOP. I had 4 months left on my BOP sentence. So I had a month in the halfway house, and then I had 3 months on home confinement.
Yeah.
Um, I spent the BOP time really focused on getting my feet back underneath me and just understanding, because I think anybody has this experience, but especially for somebody who wants to go back to working in tech
Yeah.
and I mean, even just those 14 months specifically, it's like when OpenAI comes out and it's all these things, these crazy things that are changing everything. And it's, Elon buys Twitter and now that's fundamentally different. And like all these
Yeah.
different things have changed. So I really took the summer to like just absorb what's going on, get in the lay of the
Mm-hmm.
land. And then right around when I left BOP, I really started turning up the job hunt. I knew that I wanted to go back into early stage startups. It's exciting. It's what I
Mm-hmm.
do. It's where,
So you
I
are.
found success in my career. Right.
Yeah.
And very, very fortunate to find some, open-minded founders who, expressed a lot of understanding and were willing to give me, a chance at proving that like that was just a series of mistakes that I've learned from. And
Yeah.
so, very fortunate to, be back working for startups and business development. And and then the other thing that I'm starting to work on now is I'd really love to start working with people who are especially younger entrepreneurs in the tech startup world
Mm-hmm.
and helping share my
Your
story, share
story.
what I'm the whole thing because um, I didn't go into this with any kind of malintent. I went into
No.
this just trying to build something, and I and I know how easy it was for one lie to become thousands,
Mm-hmm.
and the self-talk that you give yourself to justify.
Rationalize it.
I
Yep.
understand all these broken thoughts, right? And I think that there are a lot of people who go to these incubator and accelerator demo days and they're putting their slides up on the screen
Mm-hmm.
and not knowing it, they're committing securities fraud, right? They're soliciting
Yeah.
investment and they're securing investment that are based on things that are often, at best exaggerations or embellishments, but,
Yeah.
often crossing the line. So, trying to find the best way to do that. That's
You'd be great at
that's
that.
life today.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you be a great voice in that arena because that's needed, and it's the reason why you would really be good at it is that you've done it and you've experienced all the steps. So when you're talking to somebody, they're like, "Oh, well, I guess, well, yeah, we had to listen to Drew," and
Yeah,
and
I
we
hope so. I don't know that I would have when I was in my mid 20s. If some guy showed up and was like, "I was just impressed," I probably would have told the guy to buzz off. But I'm really hopeful that I can find a way to do it and for the message to
no, I
land
think there
because
is. I think for the most part, I think people who are wanting to get to the next step in their lives, they also want to hear the minefields to avoid because they don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. If there's a way to get to where they want to go without having to go into the ditch,
right,
or if they get in the ditch to figure out how to get out of it. And one of the things I told you before we got on, the greatest thing about the experience is you learn you can definitely adapt to anything, and you still have your brain. You can lose everything else, but if you have your brain and you can grit it out, there's a lot of people that will listen to your story and say, you know what? I'm going to give Drew a shot. He's got it. Whatever that thing is, he's got it. We're going to give him a shot. And that's all you're wanting. You want the opportunity to get back into the game,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is a big deal.
So many, quotes and lines and things, but I think that the biggest one that I think about almost every day is that suffering ceases to be suffering when it finds a purpose.
Hmm.
And I just think about all the suffering that I caused, all of these people around me, right? The employees, my friends and families and investors and just stakeholders, my co-founder and my ex-fiance, all these people.
Yeah.
And wanting to, a couple years from now or whatever, be able to look back and take inventory and say, yeah, I caused all that suffering. I experienced all that suffering. But here's what came from it. And there was a purpose and there was a point to it. That's really what I'm
Yeah.
focused on.
I love it. That's good stuff. What do you think out of all this stuff that you've just talked about, Drew, is your biggest takeaway through all of it to share out there to the
Um,
listeners?
yeah, I think when I was going through my offense conduct, when I was making all these mistakes, when I was lying, when I was um, uh, committing securities bank and wire fraud, um, I just wasn't really being very thoughtful. I was being very careless, not just with my own life, but with all these people that are around me. And so something that I've really oriented myself on is being more thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional so
Mm.
that when I wake up, if I know that I'm about to do something, it serves some kind of purpose and I really think through how it's going to impact. I mean, my biggest takeaway really was if you asked me, a couple of years ago, hey, like if this company blows up and you end up getting arrested and all that and whatever, I would have said, that's just for me to deal with. That's just something that I'll have to like deal with the consequences
Mm-hmm.
and whatever. Um, Not that simple.
Yeah.
And it's just important to be mindful and acknowledge that we're all interconnected, both those people that are really close to you and then all of the ripple effects outside of that. So just, yeah, being more intentional
Uh,
and deliberate and thoughtful.
I think that is a great takeaway. And I love your story and how you tell it, Drew, because you're just so open and honest about that. And I think that's what draws people into stories like this is because, everybody has a point in their life where they've got to decide, what am I going to do? And if you get too caught up in the moment and not thinking about it, you can make the wrong decision. And, those decisions can be something that you have to deal with, but it doesn't mean that it has to define you. It means that you don't make that mistake again. And I think that's
Right.
the cool part about what you're talking about is you can find your passion and you can go make changes, and they haven't taken your brain, and God knows what Drew could do from here on out. What are you, 34 years old?
Yeah, 35. Yeah. Yeah.
35
Well,
years
thank you.
old.
That's very kind of you.
35 years old is a good age, speaking from a guy who's 56. Drew, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, where do people go to find you?
My website is chapin.io, chapin.io, and that has, my email, my LinkedIn,
Cool.
whatever your social media of choice is. It's all
Yeah.
linked to there. So yeah,
Cool.
chapin.io.
So you make it easy.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to find me, go to brentcassity.com. That's with a TY, not a DY. We spell it wrong. I'm loving I'm continuing to get a lot of good reviews coming in on Apple and others. I love that because it so helps the show. If anybody's out there thinking, hey, I've only got a few days left until Christmas, go buy Nightmare Success. It's easy. They'll deliver it to you. It's on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Drew, thanks so much for sharing your story today. It's good stuff, man.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks.
Nightmare Success, in and out.